GameMarx.
This episode of GameMarx is going to go a little bit differently than ones in the past. If you're listening to this on the audio version, this may be a time where you need to go to YouTube and watch it there. I don't know how it's going to come out over audio. At any rate, this will be a little bit different, a bit of a special one, so take a moment, settle in, grab yourself a cup of tea, and let's begin. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. It's been a while since I've recorded one of these podcasts. You may notice some weird speech patterns because I have no teeth at the moment. I got a couple of screws. You might say I've gotten screwed. But that's an ongoing process. But I'm up to the point where I can definitely do the podcast, and I have been going and speaking at a couple of conferences. One of the sessions that I gave is the title here, Quest for Fun, is the session, is the content that I want to do for you today. This presentation, this slide deck, marks a pretty big milestone for me as a game designer, because it catalogs and journeys really 5 years of game design study that I've been doing mostly in the background of GameMarx and our game development that we've done at Funkworks. But it's been an ongoing thought process for me to get in my head a working understanding of what makes a good game, what makes a game good. I want you to know that nothing in this presentation is mine and my own research, and I'm going to make a lot of calls out to where I am sourcing the information. Please know these are not my ideas, but these are the ideas that stuck with me, and these are the ideas that one person's idea melded into another person's idea and picked up and carried the information a little bit further. So enough about that. Let's talk a moment here on game design, right? And what we kind of have to frame this topic a bit. Right off the bat, I'm gonna take from the Book of Lenses here, and game design can be cinematography, public speaking, architecture, visual arts, business, anthropology, management, animation, creative writing, economics, music, sound design, technical writing, psychology, engineering, history, communications. These are all the arts and disciplines that you need to have a working knowledge of, if not mastery of, or definitely be adept at it, to really go into game design as a career, as a field, even as a hobby, if you want to make a game that resonates with people, that connects with people. And I feel that as game designers, a lot of us are in that to share an experience, to craft something, to create something that allows us to reach out and touch the gamer, and share a bond or an experience in some way, no matter what kind of game that we're building. I think ultimately, that's what as game designers are kind of motivating us. Maybe not everyone, but definitely many that I've talked to and spoken with, I think would agree on that. But of all of these skills here, the most important one is not on the board. The most important one is listening, right? That is the most important thing that as game designers we need to not only be doing, but developing our skills at listening. I'm going to come back to that. That's going to be a theme through this talk. But I want to kind of set you out on the journey with me, which really began with IncaBlocks. And this is something we've joked about a lot on the podcast. Longtime listeners will know And if you're long enough to have listened to us when we were Funkworks and the podcast was called Feel the Funk, then this isn't going to be a surprise to you. But IncaBlocks is a puzzle game based on the board game called Rumus. Later, the board game Rumus was bought out by Blockus, and it's now known as the game Blockus 3D. So if you want to go into Walmart and pick up Blockus 3D, you are playing IncaBlocks. It's pretty much the same thing. Mechanics work basically the same way. And the cool thing about it is that around the time that Xbox Live community games launched, Xbox Live indie games, of course, anybody who listens to this podcast is familiar with this, but when the community games launched, and XNA allowed anybody to pay $100 and unlock their console for game development and then sell their games, that became the point at which I stopped thinking about game design and toying around with game design while living my normal programmer life and said, hey, I want to make games. I really want to make some games now. Now, of course, I'm not quitting the day job. I'm definitely at the low end of the spectrum, where I would say I am a hobbyist / indie game developer. There are game developer studios that are quite indie, but do it full time, and I don't put myself in that boat. That's even a step above what I do because, I go on Monday through Friday and work a regular job and do this in my spare time. So I'm not as dependent upon the outcome of my game as some other studios, but that doesn't mean I care if they fail or not. In fact, I do care a lot if they fail or not. Now, my definition of failure is not financial. Very good thing, because these are the sales charts for our first week out of the gate here for IncaBlocks. And the blue line represents trial downloads. So at peak, we had a little over 400 people in one day download and check out the game. The green line that never seems to get off of zero is the actual sales of IncaBlocks. We never reached a payout from Microsoft. I think our account sits at $132 to date. 150 being the criteria for them to even bother with the hassle of sending you money. Now, I can go into many, many reasons, and I've done postmortems and discussions on IncaBlocks, and there's many things that were done wrong from a mechanic standpoint, and just the way the game was framed. But overall, the game failed on one hinge point. And it's taken a long time to come to terms and also be able to say this, but the game was not fun. Full stop. That's it. No amount of inverting the controls or not having a good tutorial mode or anything like that compensate for the fact that the game wasn't fun. And this really starts the journey because you can take two views of fun. You can believe that fun is something magical and it's a unicorn, and when you're in the fairy forest you will stumble upon fun and it'll be an amazing moment, but it's just sheer chance. I think that's bullshit. I think fun is something that we can engineer and we can set up for. I think fun is something that can be defined and measured. Okay? Now, I don't know how to do all of these things, and definitely not at this point in the journey. But that gives me a goal and something that I could work forward to. I could further try to understand fun in the belief that it can be understood. Because if I take the other route, I can do nothing but throw games out to the wind and hope they stick. And that's not the way that I do things. That is not my personality. That is not the way I approach problems. I approach problems that there is a solution in mind or possible, and I will figure it out as we go. I don't need to know what the solution is before I set foot into building the solution, but that we'll figure it out as we go, but that the end is a noble thing. So on that, we kind of have to rail in what is the fun that we're wanting to define. Fun can be many things, so To rail this in a bit, my definition has become, what are the conditions and actions required to elicit the emotional response commonly associated with fun in a given person or group? That's a bit different. Now I'm saying, how can I take someone and make them have fun? At least make them think they're having fun, or make them have some feeling or emotions they would describe as fun. It's a bit subtle from what you may think of as fun, and why do you have that? Well, it's because we have to reel this in and define that. Now, the funny thing is that once I've kind of reeled this in and you've defined it, you've got it going, it's not a hard answer. It's actually quite easy. In fact, you may be shocked to know this short into the podcast, I'm going to tell you that fun is the eureka moment. That our definition of fun simply is the aha moment, the moment in which something becomes clear, when things click for you, you're having fun. And you think on that for a moment, but it doesn't have to be a giant eureka moment. You don't have to invent the light bulb, or if you're Thomas Edison, maybe you claim to invent the light bulb. I wasn't there, I can't say who did what. But it can be just a small thing, such as figuring out the mastery of double jump. Okay? And this leads to the next part of games. What do fun games do? Fun games teach. Now this is a bit of a revelation, and it was for me. Because games being used to teach is something that seems to be a cutting edge, a thing we're exploring. How can we use games to teach? And the problem is not how do we use games to teach, is how did we stop teaching without games? Teaching left games behind. Games never left teaching behind. And the approach of these serious games and things like that are actually quite backwards. The methods we're using for teaching have abandoned games and are now trying to come back to it, but not understanding that they were the ones who left. So what do we mean by games teach? Do we mean that all games are educational? Well, yes, at some level. But the subject matter may not be what you consider schoolroom educational subject matter. It doesn't have to be a Kerbal Space Program that we're teaching you the physics of rocket science, okay? It could simply be that Mario can jump on top of a mushroom guy, or on top of a Goomba, and kill him, alright? That's all we have to teach. We don't have to reach out for grand concepts here. We can teach the very basic, the very simple, into our game, and that will yield the eureka moment, because when the gamer learns that Mario can jump on the Goomba, they get a little bit of a smile, a little endorphin rush, a little bit of eureka moment is there. And if we can meter these out and pace these out in our games, then we can have a game that is fun. Okay? Where does this come from, by the way? This has not just come from the ethos or Mike making shit up or something like that. No, it's evolution, okay? The eureka moment, the understanding is evolution telling us. It's our body's telling us that you're doing the right thing. You're learning and acquiring information and figuring out how to use that information. That one person has passed on information to you, and we're going to continue as a species, and it's going to be done quite well. If you look at the beginning, and you look at some of the studies and things of the way humans evolved, all of our original games were based around hunting and gathering, okay? All the games that the cavemen showed that they might have played were helping them either be better hunters or better gatherers, depending upon their role. And it was just the basic language of how do you teach someone something. You make a game out of it that teaches those concepts. Now, we're very far moved away from where we have to use games to teach how to survive, okay? You know, Tetris, of course, is not teaching us anything about survival. But you are playing with spatial concepts and figuring out how to see that piece rotated. When you get into the zone in Tetris, it feels pretty good. You've mastered it. It's evolution. So this leads to a pretty easy gimme when you're doing your game design, and that's a tutorial. Okay? Your tutorial should not beat the gamer over the head with, this is how you play my game, because you're leaving so many great teaching moments on the table that you can figure those out. Again, go back to Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers. When those two Goombas at the very beginning are coming right at you, all you have is jump. Notice that there's two of them. So, intentionally or not, what the game teaches you is to jump on. Because the odds are you're not going to clear both of them next to each other in your first jump. You're going to land on one or the other. You're not going to make that jump. But you're going to learn that you can jump on things, which is pretty much the language of Mario Brothers. It is a whole bunch of jumping on things, and they play with that concept later when you meet the turtle, and that you can jump on it and then kick it. And they're just doing small, little, subtle things throughout the game to teach you, but keeping that endorphin drip, keeping that teaching moment, keeping those eureka moments coming. Don't waste that. Don't have a bad tutorial. You're leaving so much on the table. Now, for this to work, the fun needs the familiar, okay? You can't throw somebody into something that they have no context for. It's confusing. They don't know what to make of it. It's frustrating. In fact, these are the words you will hear describe your game. I was confused. It was frustrating. It was dense. Rather than, it was unfamiliar. But what they're really telling you is, the setting was not familiar. Okay? So, what we need to actually do is develop a game that works on small, constant changes. Okay? We don't want to make big changes because that will be into the unfamiliar zone. But we want to meter out these teaching moments in small, little change moments. And if you think of chess, it's a pretty good example for this concept here. Because in the game of chess, you know the moves pretty much out the gate. You learn the moves in a few moments, and maybe you'll play with someone who will help correct you as you go through the game what the rules are if you forget them, but you pretty much get the basics in chess really fast. The thing is that every piece that moves on the board completely changes the state of the game, right? Every choice that your opponent makes, even from the opening, especially when you're at the Master and Grandmaster levels, opens up or closes down the whole set of play options. And it's a series of back and forth of twisting the state of the game to see who can be the one that twists it to their advantage. These small constant changes are what create the enjoyment of chess, because the rules are learned in a few hours, but people will dedicate their life to playing it, and they have fun, because every move on the board creates new unique puzzles to solve, a new unique problem. So as game designers, maybe we're not allowed to create chess. But let's take an example with the Legend of Zelda. It shouldn't surprise you that I'll go to a Legend of Zelda reference. When you start out, you have nothing. Not even a sword. Now you can wander, as my daughters did, and when we sat them down to make Daddy made us play, and I had them play the game. Instead of going in the cave, they chose to actually defy the game designer, and they chose to, I am not going to go into this cave that you so desperately want me to go into. I'm going to break your rules and wander around. Of course, they died. And then they were reset back to here. Now, after exploring all three paths and dying, they decided to let's go in the cave and let's get the sword. It's a small change, but you have a weapon now. And the things that killed you before, you can now fight back. Of course, it's not unexpected, but it does change the entire way the game works now to you, through a small and subtle way. Plus, you have the idea of the sword shooting, and when you're at full health, and not when you're not. The whole game of the original Legend of Zelda is built through this mechanic of introducing new obstacles and then giving you the tool to overcome them. So it's a constant game of challenge, change, that keeps you progressing throughout the game, but makes it entertaining the entire time through. They don't sit you down and just give you everything at once and every ability. It would be overwhelming. It would be frustrating. It also would be no fun to play because you had all the abilities. You didn't feel like you accomplished or you earned anything, which is important because these changes need to go somewhere. They need to have direction. The change needs to yield to progress. The Darknut is pretty much the prime example of this. When you first meet this guy, he's a tough bastard now. You have to hit him from the side or the back, and he takes several shots. But eventually, you'll upgrade your sword. And when you get this new sword, all of a sudden, he's a pushover. I can handle him. Of course, then you meet a tougher version of him, and you have to get a tougher sword. This change yields to progress. The power curve, as it is called sometimes, isn't just an artifact of adventure games or one type of game. In fact, let's look at Bejeweled, a puzzle game, and how this small change and teaching moments and things like that can work in a puzzle game as well. So when you start off, if you do an exercise in Bejeweled, which you can play on the web now for free, if you look at the amount of points that you need per level to go up to the next level, and then figure out what the average score for a match 3, a basic move in the game is, it looks like a pretty solid progression. You need 10 matches to get from 1 to 2 and 500 points. Or you get 500 points for 10 matches. 15 matches will get you from level 2 to 3, 3 to 4 will be 20 matches, 25. So it seems like, hey, you're ratcheting it up by 5 each round. I get that. The score, however, isn't quite as consistent. It goes from 500 to 1,000 to 1,500 to 2,500 to 3,300 to 4,400. The score is doing something a little different there. If you take the average number of matches divided by the points needed, you can get what we call a difficulty level. So we'll say it's difficulty 50 to go from 1 to 2. It's difficulty 67 to go from 2 to 3. Now what's important here, because again it looks like the difficulty keeps going up, it's not necessarily the difficulty keeps going up, it's the rate at which the difficulty goes up. The amount of increase. So we have no increase between 1 to 2. Between 2 to 3 is a 17 increase than it was in the previous round. Then 8 between 3 and 4. And then 25 to 4 to 5. So it's actually harder to get between levels 4 to 5 than it was between levels 3 to 4. In fact, if we graph this out, you'll see this pattern repeated. But in Bejeweled, they're metering out these advancements through the power curve to allow you to feel like the things that you're learning and the things that you're learning in the game and how you master it give you a sense of accomplishment. Okay, in an RPG, in Zelda, you meet the Darknut again with your powerful weapon, and now you slay him, and you're like, aha, I have become more powerful, I can strike you down in an easier amount of time. The same thing happens in your most successful puzzle game. It seems like you're mastering it and getting better at the game, but the game designer is tweaking values behind the scene to help it feel like it's easy. And it's hard to feel like, well, now that I've got to level 4 to 5, boy, this thing is ramping up in challenge. But when I get to 5 to 6, it's going to be easier than it was through 4 to 5. And I'm going to feel like I've mastered things I learned from my hard journey in 4 to 5. That's pretty clever. Now, I'm talking about small change a lot here. But you can have large change over time. You can large change within a game, too. My example here is puzzle games, is to think of Tetris to Bejeweled. And I pull these out because they're pretty much the dominant puzzle games of their era. In the early 90s, we were all Tetris heads, and then in the early aughts, Bejeweled was the game that most people played. And, some of it has to do with systems and platforms and things like that. They're both grid-based puzzle games, they have a lot of similarity, although they play quite differently. If you took someone from the Tetris era, and just sat them down without Bejeweled, without a lot of explanation, which most people can sit down with Bejeweled without any explanation and play, they're probably going to struggle. They might tell you it's frustrating. And that's because as time went on, the language of puzzle games evolved. In the middle, and I'm grabbing just one of many, but there's Dr. Mario. And in Dr. Mario, you kind of have some of the color matching and match 3 properties of a Bejeweled game, but you still have the items drop down from the top of the screen and you rotate and position them from a Tetris game. Somebody from the Tetris area, Bejeweled looks like a game over state. It doesn't look like a normal state. And this Dr. Mario in the middle kind of creates the evolution of the genre in the middle so that the puzzle game, the matching puzzle game, the spatial puzzle game can evolve over time. You can apply this in your game, but you have to be more aware of it and more deliberate, that you're going to have to start at one end and create all those steps of evolution within your game, and they're going to have to make sense in the mechanics of the game to get to the end state. But those open up some interesting possibility. Let's talk about this large change over time with MMOs, because I think they provide a very stark contrast to how something can evolve over time. In the mid-90s, this was an MMO. This is Ultima Online, the first MMO that I really started playing, and this is the user interface. I just had the backpack open. That's it. Just a backpack of stuff. A lot of clicking, a lot of double clicking, and names over people. But for the most part, there wasn't a lot of UI on the screen. Now, this isn't everybody's World of Warcraft scheming. But this screen is quite common. That people who play World of Warcraft and have played it for years have very complicated UIs compared to what we started with. The danger here is World of Warcraft, if you see somebody playing World of Warcraft who's been into it really big, same thing happens with a Dota or League of Legends type game. When you see somebody playing that game, it looks very dense from the outside and unapproachable. And so this is kind of a negative consequence, and this is what happens to genres and why they fade away over time, is because to continue evolving within the genre requires you to have experienced a lot of the genre up until that point and to be aware of it. And it creates a problem of how do you bring new people into the genre? And as people leave the genre because they become bored or fascinated with another thing or tired of the genre or the changes in direction or something they're in, you really just can lose people. You can't gain people because it becomes too complicated. So that's something to be aware of as well. Also, it's something when you look at a genre, like, let's say, collectible card games would be a good example right now. They get very complicated, they have their own language, they're hard to approach. Blizzard is making this collectible card game that's going to be played online. That is boiling it down to its basics and its raw essence. It's not out yet for everyone to play, but it's gaining a lot of traction because it's back to basics and it's back to a simplistic form with some of the higher level gameplay lessons learned being applied that wouldn't be present if you just went back to the early collectible card games of the 90s. So that can be a sign as a game designer that, hey, you can move a genre forward by going into it and simplifying, because sometimes these large changes over time become too complicated. Something else to be aware of here is expectation. Ben Cousins developed magazine in August 2002. He did a great article summarizing what we all consider to be the great NES era platformers. These are just the perfect platformers, the Mega Mans, the Super Mario Brothers, the Castlevanias. And he found that these games were actually very, very similar in some of their base mechanics. The length of a level was 1 minute and 20 seconds. The hang time in air on a jump was 0.7 seconds. And that you could do 3 combat actions, right? Shoot 3 bullets or jump and shoot 2 bullets, etc. in about 2 seconds. And that there was very little deviation between these platforms. Now, does that mean these are the optimal values for a platformer game? No, clearly not. That's not what it's saying at all. But that these are the expectations that your gamer approaches to the game. And that this is the mindset when they sit down. So if you have a 1.5 second hang time on your jump, you need to ease the gamer into that, or have some kind of call or teaching moment that that's what's going to happen. Because otherwise, they're going to say your jump controls are floaty. Your levels could be too long if they run the 2-minute mark. You might need to put in checkpoints if you go beyond 1:20. Because the expectation is, it should only take me about 1.5 minutes to clear your level. The combat pacing could be too fast or too slow. From what I expect. Not from what's right or wrong with your game, but from what I expect when I sit down. So know this too, that these large changes over time and these genre changes create a set of expectations your gamer has when they sit down to play your game. You can break these expectations, but do so willfully and knowingly, and do them in a way that you can lead the gamer to your world and what's going on. Now, all this stuff is great. And I sat down and I read a lot of this stuff, but it still did not answer a fundamental question that had emerged now once I started knowing all these raw mechanics and good design principles and this good grounding in just what makes a good, solid, enjoyable game. And that's why we play. Why we play is as important, if not more important, than what the rules of the game are and how it's constructed and how it's put together. Games that have come along, like Minecraft, are breaking tons of what several of these rules are, but people are motivated to play them for hours on end, non-stop. And so there's another piece of the puzzle of what fun is that good game design, in and of itself, isn't going to answer. The first major piece that came together was the 8 Kinds of Fun. It comes from the MDA paper, Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics. But the MDA paper essentially broke down that there are 8 kinds of fun, 8 reasons people are sitting down to play a game. They didn't quite explain it that way and do that, but that's kind of what they were hitting at with, these are the 8 types of fun that people want to experience when they play a game. They didn't quite say these are the motivations people will have to play a game, why they game in the first place. But I think it's safe to go ahead and connect the two here. The first one is sensation. Games of sense pleasure. Basically just the raw thrill of the hunt, you know, the aha moments, the joy, running through Quake at a very fast pace, you know, pleasure-seeking, thrill-seekers. You know, just the game as sensation itself. And this could be beautiful graphics as well. Could fall into that category. Fantasy. Games as make-believe. I think this is pretty obvious. Many people play games now to escape. You play games when you're not working. You play games to unwind. Another thing is games as narrative. Definitely your RPG and JRPG crowd are playing games for an unfolding story. You don't play a game like Persona 4 unless you're interested in a story. Okay? The other kind of flip end of that is games as challenge, where you're going up against the game to beat it, to win, to master it, to better yourself, to start at a game that you're not good at. There's people who've done this with like Rock Band, say, or Guitar Hero, where they're doing Dragon Force at the end on hard. This is a game that's challenge. This is a game that I'm going to master and beat and demonstrate skill in. Then there's fellowship. Another reason for playing Rock Band is to get together with your friends, right? So this is games as a social framework. This is games where I want to play with other people either competitively or cooperatively. But it's a social dynamic and experience. Now, I think fans of the JRPG will appreciate Discovery as games as uncharted territory, just going off and exploring the area. Skyrim, definitely a lot of exploration involved there. It doesn't have to be, though, physical space exploration. It could be exploration of concepts or principles, like Kerbal Space Program. It's an exploration into physics and science, specifically rocket science, but it is still an exploration and discovery game. Expression is games as a soapbox, but more importantly, my soapbox in the game. So think of The Sims, where The Sims is kind of a dollhouse, and it is my expression of my dolls in the game. Minecraft, also a game where people express themselves through their creation and their structures. Many people don't even play it with the monsters on. They just play it in a creative or in a monster-free way so that they can build elaborate hanging gardens and pyramids and structures and castles, because they are expressing themselves in the game, almost as if painting it with it's a canvas they are painting. And then lastly, there's games of submission. Games that are mindless pastime. Games where I don't want to think. I just want to have the comfort of the familiar and do it over and over again. This is kind of a weird one, because we talked about how good game design is teaching, and submission seems counter to that, but not really. Even when you're mindless, you just don't want to be forced to deep think, okay? You just want to have small thinking. Mario jumping. You don't want to have big thinking, like, say, cracking a puzzle in Fez. It's not what you're at. So, games can be described now as combinations, which is kind of key and important, because no game is really just one of those. Examples here, let's take charades. Charades is a fellowship, it's a group activity, it's expression, it's how well can I put myself into the thing. A lot of people play it with humor, and it's also challenge. You know, can I take a topic, a word, and make people guess it? Quake, on the other hand, is definitely a challenge first and foremost, but it's also still fellowship because it's played with other players more often than not. And it's a sensation pleasure because it's a very thrill-seeking game and a very adrenaline rush game. So you could say that those are the reasons of fun that are in Quake. The Sims I mentioned earlier, I would throw into the categories of discovery, fantasy, expression, and narrative. Narrative being narrative that I create, not necessarily narrative that the game imposes. The counter to that, of course, is your Final Fantasy series, which is, of course, fantasy, narrative, expression, discovery, challenge, and submission. JRPG is a very deep and complex game system, and that is reflected in the kinds of fun that it services. Now, you can do all of these right. You can do all these mechanics right. But if you have an exclusive game design, you limit your audience. The moment, you don't necessarily have to offend, okay? This doesn't mean that you're offensive and you turn off a group because you're offensive. But if you exclude a group because they find the game frustrating or complex, you're limiting the people who can play your game. And all the other things can be done right, but nothing will get your game as underplayed as excluding a group of people. Now here, I'm going to set up an example, and I'm going to use gender as inclusive versus exclusive design, because it's an easy way to explain this topic. But what I'm talking about applies not only to gender, it applies in many, many ways, not only excluding gender and race and religions and creeds, but also excluding gamer types and the reasons that people play games. The danger is doing these unknowingly. At some point, you're going to exclude a group, but do it so knowingly. I am making a hard as fun, a challenging, brutally punishing platformer. So know that I'm excluding the people who are in it for submission and relaxing, and also know why it is that those people play those games when you do that. More on that in a moment. But let's get into this example. So here, and fully accept this example is made up for purposes of teaching and demonstration here. But I like to think that this example is quite true to what you might actually see. So this is a paragraph or two describing a game design. Camelot Adventures is a role-playing game based on the legends of King Arthur. The player selects one of 4 knights of the Round Table and rides off into medieval England. He will fight mythical beasts, rescue damsels in distress, and encounter figures of legend such as Merlin and Lady of the Lake. He will ultimately find the Holy Grail. He can then select another knight and take on the quest again with new challenges. The idea is that you're going to select one of 4 knights and play one of 4 versions of the game. Maybe the knights have some different properties or things like that. Get the Holy Grail, and then you can play the game over again. That has some replayability. Now, this is an exclusive game design, and yes, it was written to be that, so I could highlight it, but I don't think it is so far off of what you might find in the back of a game box or in a game description marketing copy of an actual game being made today. First off the bat is it is male-focused language. Now, you may think that's not a big deal, and many women will tell you it's not a big deal when you ask them. When you ask them, it's like, hey, because I use he instead of she or him, instead of her, instead of they, and I didn't use neutral language, you know, that offending or you feel excluded. And on a conscious level, even most women will say, no, I can see beyond that. I can read past that. Unfortunately, the subconscious doesn't work that way. And in the studies that have been done, shown that women will tend to not play your game if it's dominated with male language in describing it. And the reason is much more benign than you may think. It's just that there's an overwhelming number of games. So when she goes up to the local Best Buy or to buy a game, and the GameMarx are just overflowing with games to choose from, or you go into Steam, and Steam's just bombarding you with all these games to play, you have to do something to weed that down to a number you can even consider, okay? There's too many games to consider at once. So, decisions are made by the subconscious based upon cover art and blurbs and description. And what the studies have found is the games that feature male-centric language get passed over. Not because they are male-centric language. The reasons are, that doesn't sound interesting. Doesn't sound like something I would be interested in. That doesn't seem, I think I've heard this before, it's not something. And they'll grab something that doesn't get excluded. So, you may want to argue whether or not it should be that way. You may, I know gamers. Again, this is for game designers. Gamers definitely want to argue that it matters or not, but the studies have shown that it does. And as a game designer, it's a small change to make to keep people inclusive. The other thing here, and this is one that I read quite a bit on, but the playing as a male character is detrimental as well. And the reason it's detrimental has to do with one of your station and whether you're playing above or below your station. Whether you're asked to work above or below where you're currently at. So take an example. Let's talk a manager at a typical corporation. And you come in and you tell this manager, hey, the janitorial staff is short this week. What we really need you to do is help out with the janitorial staff. Generally, most managers actually aren't going to have a problem with that. He's achieved his manager station. He knows where he's at the company. But he's fine to go below his station and pitch in and help out, no problem. Now, if you come in, you tell that same manager, hey, the vice president's out this week. We need you to take over for the vice president and do these meetings here and handle these things. you'll actually see that heart rate go up, stress increases, he's uncomfortable. And it's this idea of when you're acting above your station, you feel like a fraud. You feel you don't belong there. Most importantly, you suffer the imposter syndrome, which is where you expect somebody at any moment to come and tell you, wait a minute, you're faking it. You don't belong here. This happens to people with great success. They feel above their station. They don't feel like a successful person. They don't feel like they should have the money that they've had from their success. They feel at any moment somebody's going to tap them on the shoulder and say, wait a minute, you're an imposter. Give it all back. And they would happily almost do that because of the increased stress of elevating the station. Why does this come down to playing as a male character versus playing as a female character? Well, studies have shown that men can play a female character and have less stress than a female playing a male character. And it has to do with, unfortunately, a male society, a male-dominated society, where generally men hold the higher ranks, and implicitly, a female playing a male character, you have moved her up in station, at least to what she sees and what she observes. And this happens on a subconscious level, and women would rather play women than play men. More so than a man would play a woman. So it doesn't work both ways, and just because as a man you play a woman, you don't see any problem with it. And again, asking women, when they're asked on it, you have what I call the ice cream problem. It's a question you can't survey. I can't ask you if you want ice cream. Because once I put the idea in your head, you think about it, you're like, yeah, I want ice cream. But I don't know if you wanted ice cream, or if you just want ice cream because I put the idea in your head. So know that this affects it. Know that this can shape your game design. And I've seen it with my own daughter. We play Dungeon Defenders quite a bit. And the Dungeon Defenders, as it launched, because they don't want to play male characters, locked away 3/4 of the content of the game from them. Because there are 4 characters. There's a mage, a ranger, a monk, and a fighter, paladin type character. But all of these are tied to a gender, and only the ranger is a female character. And since the girls want to play as a female, then they're limited to only choosing the ranger class, and they don't experience the mage or the fighter classes or the monk classes because they don't want to play as a male character. So by not offering those choices in a game that literally would not have a big impact either way, if they had male and female versions of each of them, they've restricted content. So they can do everything else right, and they do in Dungeon Defenders. They make so many right decisions in Dungeon Defenders. It's such a great game. My daughters fell out of playing it much quicker than they would have if they could have come back and replayed it as other classes. Whereas I leveled all 4 characters up, they leveled 1 character up, and then we're done with the game and moved on. It was kind of heartbreaking to me because it was a game we played together, and they just kind of lost interest in it. The last thing on this one is there's fewer or no positive female characters, which again could be a subconscious exclusion of the game. Just not seeing any positive female characters in there can be a turnoff to the game. I say possibly no, because it depends on how you do the Lady of the Lake. You can definitely do her as this naked fan service to a 13-year-old, and you can also do her as a very powerful female figure who decides the fate of governments in the Middle Ages. So it can be done either way. It depends on how you implement it. Alright, so let's take this and let's fix it. Okay? So, a role-playing game based on the legends of King Arthur. The player begins as a knight finding Camelot in ruin. The Holy Grail is lost, and the Knights of the Round Table are missing. The king asks the player to find the knights, who are each ensnared in their own quest. Each encounter presents a new challenge as the player fights mythical beasts, solves ancient puzzles, and encounters figures of legend such as Merlin and Lady of the Lake. In the end, the player returns to Camelot with the Holy Grail and is made a full Knight of the Round Table. Okay, what have we done? First off, on the surface, it's neutral language. That was an easy fix. And again, no reason not to. Really, there's not a reason not to. Don't listen to the angry gamers. Expand your market and buy it. expand your market and get more people to buy the game. And if that's what it takes, that seems like an easy fix. Because guess what? Game development is hard. Fixing the copy on the back of the box is easy. The next thing here is the player can choose their avatar. So, this is kind of key in a few important ways here. One, now we do have a little bit extra work because we have to build an avatar creator so they can create their avatar. But now we're no longer locked into either gender. They can choose a male or female. We can explore abilities and customization, but at the beginning, it could be just as simple as the avatar choice in Ultima 7. Male or female. And that's it, and the rest of the game is set. So it doesn't have to be a big, deep, involved thing, but we solved that other problem really easily. Now, one thing emerged here as we allowed the player to choose their avatars, that they can't play as the Knights of the Round Table, because that's set in Arthur Legend, and we're not going to change that. We're going to try to stay true to the Arthurian legend. But the side benefit here is the player is rewarded. So now the player goes out and meets the knight, helps the knight, and ultimately returns back to King Arthur and becomes a knight. That's sort of a side benefit that we got by challenging our design assumptions and trying to make it inclusive. The player themselves are rewarded. And to me, this creates a more interesting game than we had to begin with, all without really no new content. We still have 4 different types of quests that we're running. We still have all the character models that we're going to do anyway, with the exception of the player's avatar. Pretty much everything can stay as it was. We could go deeper with it, but we don't necessarily have to. We just make a few tweaks at a surface level, and we're good. And I think this is a much more fun game to play. I think this game would be very, very interesting, and I would enjoy it, while not having to go one way or the other with things. Now, I'm not saying you can't have a male or a female protagonist lead your game. I'm saying when you make those decisions, make them consciously, and make them in a way that you open up and make it comfortable for the other groups to might come in and recoup some of that back. The good news is, once you scaled by 1 to 2, once you go from handling one gender to both genders, you handle the sex problem and gender praise problem in your game, you solve so many others, and you make it so much easier. Because now if you want to look at it from the terms of race, because had you made the original game, it would have been a white male-dominated game because it's Arthurian legend. That's where it's set. That's pretty much what the legend is. In fact, you might have actually got some racial attacks had you set the game and done some of the conquests that were done by the Arthurian legend in the Crusades, and who they actually fought and what those people would have looked like. I'm not going to draw that conclusion for you, but I think you could figure it out. But now that we're allowing the player to choose their avatar, the problems of race are kind of solved. That's really easily. Go in and add a couple more options to the avatar, and now we've opened it up for any background. You can make the player look like you fairly easy because we solved the problem from one layer. So this, among any other reason, is why to hold your game design up to gender issues and really look at it and try to make it a gender neutral game as much as you can, because by scaling from 1 to 2, you get all the rest pretty much free. And it challenges the assumption in your game design. But at the end of the day, remember what I'm saying here. Make your decisions knowingly, not accidentally. Okay, but this leads to a blind spot problem. Gender might not even be something for you easy to grasp, right? You're not the other gender. So you didn't grow up as them. You didn't grow up as all races. You don't have all walks of life to draw from in your personal experiences. And essentially it creates a blind spot. So here are the people who could play my game. And these are the people who do play my game. I love you. You're not very many on IncaBlocks, but I love each and every one of you. And these are the people who are like me. This smallest group here, right, in this Venn diagram, are the people who've had the same background experiences, like the same things that I do, and see things through the same lens that I do. The rest of these people are in my blind spot. I don't understand why they're playing my game, why they enjoy my game, why they didn't play my game, why they did play my game and didn't enjoy it. Because they're not like me, and I don't have a good view into my blind spot. So how do you solve the blind spot problem? Through empathy. Remember how listening at the beginning was the most important skill? It goes beyond listening to feedback. You need to listen to gamers and people and walks of life and develop an accurate empathy model for them so that you can make games they will enjoy. Now, going deeper into this subject, I'm basically going to have to say here that I know I told you everything is ripped off, that nothing of mine is original, but Jason VandenBerghe, not only have I ripped off his ideas, I ripped off the dude's slide. I'm probably going to rip off a few of his jokes. And Jason, if you ever see this deck, if anybody ever sends this to you, I apologize for ripping off your jokes on your slides. But you nail this so well. And if I can make one request, Jason, while I have your attention. You owe us a book, Jason. You cannot leave this earth until you have fleshed this out, finished your research, and put it into a nice book that we can cite and study in depth and understand. Because what Jason has done is really quite amazing. So Jason VandenBerghe, if you don't know, has worked for major game companies, EA, Ubisoft, key designer behind Far Cry 3. Big dude in the world of game design, also physically, big dude. But a very smart guy, and a guy who is asking him many of the same questions that I found myself asking. And I got to see his keynote at the East Coast Gamers Conference. And basically, I'm taking his keynote slides here, and I'm chopping some things off because I had covered them or come to them other ways. And I don't need to frame the whole conversation at this point. But essentially what Jason did is, I believe he sat down with his sister and he started this, and his sister being a psychologist, sister or sister-in-law, or close relative, it didn't even matter, and him being a game designer, and he sat down with the psychologist and said, wait a minute, there's an overlap here, and something as a game designer we can use. So, using the big ocean, which is a psychologist tool for measuring the tendencies and the preferences and categorizing people, kind of like a Myers-Briggs test, if you've ever taken a Myers-Briggs test. Although this one's kind of supplanting Myers-Briggs. And it's an open model that anybody can use, adapt, and study. Which is what's brilliant about it. And so a lot of people are using it, and a lot of groups are studying it. So what is ocean? Well, ocean represents our gamer. And ocean stands for openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These are the big five that you get rated upon. You're scaled as to one end or not of each one of these spectrums. And in fact, each one of these spectrums is actually a list of spectrum on their own. So openness to experience is actually imagination, your artistic interest, emotionality, adventurousness, intellect, and liberalism. Where you fall in all those actually define your score in openness. So you actually have 6 scores under each one of these. So, remember we had 5 domains of play? Or, I'm sorry, we had 8 reasons to play, 8 motivations for play, 8... well, we got to map them down to 5. And Jason did that. And he mapped the 5 down to novelty, challenge, stimulation, harmony, and threat. Threat's a bit of a weird one. Back to that in a moment. And then he did some surveys and some study. Okay? Actual data has been collected on to where he's surveyed the gamers for their personalities, and then he surveyed the types of games they like to play. And he's created correlations for these. These are the numbers here. Those are correlations that show a statistical connection between your psychological profile and the type of games that you like. This is pretty damn revelatory and cool because it starts to say, hey, I know what you think fun is. Because of your psychological profile will tell me what kind of games you tend to play. And what elements are in those games can help me build games that are going to map these. This is very cool shit. Now, if you're familiar with correlations, they go from 0 to 1. 1 is a perfect correlation, 0 is no correlation. They can actually go -1 or 1. That just means they correlate in an opposite direction. These are all positive, so as one goes up, so does the other. Except for threat down there at the bottom has a really low number, right? 2.8 is not a great number. 0.51, that's a mid-level tier. Most of these are in the mid-level zones, meaning you're onto something, but you haven't quite explained everything that's going on. I don't expect you to get to 1s on all of these. That's ridiculous, but all we need is a good chunk to begin to understand what's going on. But 0.15 is no correlation. That's nothing. Let's throw it out. That's noise, that's data. Well, what it turns out is that threat, neuroticism are the reasons that people quit playing games. So that's interesting for another time, okay? Well, we're going to cross that out. We're going to drop the end here and just look at novelty, challenge, stimulation, harmony, and how they map to openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness. I'm going to leave the others out. Okay, so now that we have these 4, what do? Jason likes to talk about a guy named Dan, and Dan always asks, what's it good for? Which is a good question to ask. And like Jason, I'm kind of already sold on it. I'm like, this is amazing revelatory information here. But we need to be able to apply it. It needs to be a model you can walk away from and use, or it's not good for anything. It's just some trivia. So what Jason did is he took each one of these, and remember I said that they map to 6 other sub-attributes? Well, he simplified it down and mapped each one to 2, because figuring out all 6 is quite complicated, and they might all not make sense. So right now he's got a working model where he has a total of 8 attributes across the 4 major groups here, and those are realism versus fantasy, maps to your imagination. Building versus exploration, maps to your adventurousness. Easy versus hard, maps to self-efficacy. Work versus impulse, maps to your self-discipline. Group versus solo is your gregariousness. Thrilling versus serene is your excitement-seeking. PvP versus team is your accommodation. And context versus mechanics maps to your sympathy. We're going to go over each one of these in detail, but the important thing to know here, the thing to keep in the back of your mind, is that the distribution of people in the population, the people who could play your game, the population of all people, is a standard deviation on all of these attributes. In other words, there are just as many people at one end as the other end. It has an even distribution with a clustering toward the center. Okay? Know that when it comes to the types of games available to play, it's not an even distribution. There are many types of games we're not providing yet that there are players for. Merely because we haven't thought of games outside of our own context, but also, as game designers, we tend to have a narrow definition ourselves. In fact, as we go on to the next bit, I want you to play along, and I want you to figure out, just self-evaluate, where you fall on these charts. So we're going to take each one of these, and we're going to build a grid. Okay? So we're going to take these 2 axes, and we're going to invert them, cross them with each other, create 4 quadrants, and we want you to figure out what quadrant you're in. So the first quadrant here is our novelty. And on the on the north-south, we have fantasy versus realism. Would you rather play in a fantasy world or a realistic world? Now, when you answer that question, just try to pick for the moment of, all things being equal, I would rather do this than the other. It does not mean you don't like doing the other, and it does not mean you can't go through phases where you prefer to play one over the other and then are in a different mood by the end of the night and want to go the other way. The distribution on these for the population says most people will tend to cluster around the middle anyway, but for this test, let's just go ahead and just pick one or the other. And then decide whether you would rather explore the world, explore concepts, or you would rather build things. You would rather play within the knowledge you have. Figure out what quadrant you're in, and then go ahead and put some personality. Again, these are Jason's names and characters that he chose, because I'm not going to dare alter these characters, because I'm sure they are a fierce topic of debate as to what is the archetype character who represents each one of these quadrants. In the top quadrant here, fantasy, exploration, we have our adventurer, Alice in Wonderland. Okay? And if you think about Alice in Wonderland, she follows the white rabbit down the rabbit hole, drink things labeled drink me, and doesn't really question the why. We just go along into this fantasy adventure and explore all the things around us, right? In the exploration but realism category, we have Sherlock Holmes. He is the investigator. He is interested in exploring things of reality, concept, the law. How is this mystery constructed? How did the crime get pulled off? Okay? Doesn't want any of this fantasy crap. Everything that he explores is based in reality and in things that are provable and knowable. The realism builder is our architect. Here is Samwise Gamgee. The man goes on the greatest quest of all time and really just wants to come home and garden. Okay? Has no time for exploration or fantasy worlds. He's a very pragmatic character. Last, we have our builder in the fantasy realm, and that is our inventor. Tony Stark only invents things, well, any inventor only builds things, by definition, that don't exist. In fact, Tony Stark says he's not even interested in refining something that exists. He's going to create the fantastical and the new. So now the second part of this is to figure out what types of games they would play. Alice in Wonderland would play a lot of Skyrim. No shock there. Sherlock Holmes plays Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, one of his favorite games, an exploration into the law. Now, I've not played Anno 1414, but I understand it to be a very realistic simulator, kind of a Sim City of the 1400s that is very, very steeped in realism. Very methodical, and very long civilization type gameplay session. Tony Stark likes to play StarCraft, but Tony, not so much on the multiplayer, and he likes to play it where he masses up to the top of the tech tree, builds the ultimate fighting force, and rolls the map, okay? He's not a guy who goes in for small raids and tactics, unless he has really custom power upgrade units and can use his advanced tech tree to dominate the map. That's the way he likes to play StarCraft. Alright, now we have our challenge course. Okay? Our challenge, conscientiousness. We have skilled play versus less skilled play. Not necessarily easy versus hard. Okay? Doesn't mean less skilled play is a simple game. It just means it doesn't require a lot of skill to master, to understand the rule set. Whereas skilled play does have a very complicated, difficult system that you will have to develop a skill for to play the game. Work versus impulse, again, is not a lazy versus dedication. It's that, do you want to put in a lot of time and effort into the game versus do you just want to pick it up and go? Okay? Again, these you might be thinking, why would you want to do anything other, than one or the other of these? But know that as a game designer, that's your bias speaking. The population distributes evenly. So the skilled work player is Hermione Granger, the masterer of all things. I don't know that these are real words. I think that masterer, and down here in the work play less skilled, we have Ron. Perseverer, I'm dead certain is not a real word. But they do aptly describe. When you need the plan, when you need the person who studied all the spells and knows how to get you out of the jam, you go to Hermione. Ron tries hard. A lot. But he doesn't really develop the skill in it. But he is a perseverer. Now, the impulse play and low skilled is the dude. Of course, he just is the dabbler. Goes wherever it takes him. Doesn't finish a lot of games. Messes around with them for a little bit and kind of moves on to whatever catches his fancy next. And then last we have the talent. Skilled play, but impulsive. Tends to play a lot of things that they're already good at. Once they've kind of mastered a genre, they tend to stick within that genre. Okay? But they do have a natural talent for a natural skill for their chosen genre. So what do these people play? Well, Hermione plays Dark Souls. If you're not familiar with Dark Souls, brutally difficult. You will basically have to memorize the entire game to play the game, type of game. What does Ron play? I don't think you should be surprised here, but Ron plays Farmville. He likes to kick back, click his cows, put in a lot of time and effort, but not a lot of skill is required for him to play his game. The dude likes to play The Sims, but if you play The Sims, you must turn on the all-money cheat. Don't bother questing or doing any missions, you just mess around with The Sims and the all-money cheat, and just play a whole bunch of things and do whatever takes you at the moment. And last we have Devil May Cry for Harry here, because Harry likes the combo button mashers, but he's good at it, so he doesn't really have to learn the next one when he picks it up. He can easily go from Devil May Cry to Bayonetta, because he kind of understands the base work of the systems, but he likes to just jump in there, look awesome, and jump out of the fight without having to spend a whole lot of time in the game. Our next actress is Stimulation, okay? And here we have multiplayer versus solo. Do you like to play alone, or do you like to play with friends? And Excitement versus Serenity. Do you like a lot of chaos and activity going on, or do you like a very peaceful, calm game? Again, take a moment, figure out where you are on the chart, and let's map some of these to characters. Multiplayer and Excitement is our party animal, yeah, baby. This person loves to play with groups and friends and have a good old time. The lone wolf character, here's Wolverine. Basically, he likes a lot of excitement, but solo. Not in groups, by himself. Doesn't tend to want to count on anybody or have to deal with anybody else. Plays the games that are fast-paced and intense, but by himself. The Hermit likes peaceful and solo. Yoda lives on a planet by himself. Think about that. You cannot get much more hermit than that. Lastly, we have the multiplayer, but Serenity. Professor X, Professor Charles Xavier here. And the professor, he likes the school, but likes it calm. Let's not fight, guys. Let's all go together as a team. So what do we have for games for these guys? Well, Just Dance, Rock Band, all of those are definitely in the zone of the party animal. No argument there. Call of Duty and your modern warfare shooters and things like this, Battlefield, things like that, the lone wolf will play, but generally not in multiplayer, or if he goes into multiplayer, he doesn't group up, he doesn't voice chat, plays by himself. If the party animal may be prone to pick up a Call of Duty because it's a group game, does go into it and groups everybody up and let's all raid and take this down and come together as a team. The party animal would be playing a Team Fortress game. The lone wolf, he's not really into Team Fortress. It requires too much dependence on others. The hermit, Yoda likes flower. Just sitting back, relaxing. He probably enjoyed Proteus as well. Something you can play by yourself. It's very peaceful gameplay. You can also put a lot of puzzle and logic games in there. Just peaceful, at your own pace. Let the game reveal itself to you as it goes. Now, it's hard to find multiplayer games that also are serene. Jason came up with Animal Crossing, but only if you play it with friends. So you go to their Animal Crossing, and you help them mine their fruit, shake their trees, dig up their other creatures. So if you're going to play a game as Professor Xavier here, Animal Crossing, and you've got to play it with friends in friend mode, there's a good area right there for some game design ideas to be bound on. What can you do that's a multiplayer serene game? Some people say Journey there, and it's not really a multiplayer, it's a two-person co-op. You don't have a grand group, so kinda in the middle. Because you also don't know you're grouping with someone, so the hermit can play with that as well. Okay, Harmony. Last one to figure out where you are on the list here. Team versus PvP. Not only is this I play with other people or I play against other people, but on the PvP axis, it's important to you that other people lose when you win. Okay? It's not winning if somebody's not losing. That's another trait on the PvP axis. Whereas team is kind of a team adventure, and it's not important that the other team is losing as much as we're playing together. And the other axis that goes along really well with this is mechanics versus context. Is it more important why we're doing something or how we're doing the something? Is the why, the grand scheme, the big question, why are we here, more important than the rules of the game, than the mechanics, than what the rules of engagement are, right? If you ever have somebody that's like, no fair, you cheated, right? And you're like, well, I didn't cheat, we just, expanded the rules. That's a mechanics player. The guy that expanded the rules is a context player, right? So, our team context player is Mickey Mouse. Wants to get everybody together, most specifically King Mickey, from the Kingdom Hearts series. But just get everybody together and let's all play along together. He's the sport. He likes everybody to get together and have a good time. That's the most important thing for him. Everybody gets together and we have a good time doing it. Doesn't so matter much what we're doing. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you can put many, many Jedi here. But I'm going to have to go with Jason on this one and say Qui-Gon Jinn is the obvious choice because of long hair and beard. Goatee and long hair, that's a Jedi choice. But the important thing here is why we do something. But very, very combative. Okay? The Sith must go down for the Jedi to prevail. Okay? So, on the opposite side of this, the mechanics people. Our PvPer is Snake Plissken. Okay? From the movie Escape from New York, right? He didn't care about anyone. Just tell me what it is I have to do, and I'll do it, and that's it. Okay? In fact, they had to, spoilers, put a bomb in his neck to make him even do that much. Okay? At the top end here, the team mechanic person we have is Nick Fury. Stop asking why and get out there and save the world. Alright? That's Nick Fury. He's our soldier. So what games do we play here? Well, Mickey's going to play RPGs. And this team versus PvP is not with or without other people, okay? This could still be a solo player. That's on the stimulation chart, right? So he could easily be playing Planescape Torment or World of Warcraft. But either way, we're getting the whole team together, and we're going to save the world together and play as a team, and everybody has fun. More important than why we're doing it. On the why end of the spectrum, we have EVE Online. Tons of people losing so others can win, and tons of context are happening in EVE Online. Perfect game for Qui-Gon Jinn here to play. Now, Snake, it should not be a surprise here, likes Quake Arena. Again, no Team Fortress for him. That cooperative team, screw this. The rules are the only thing that matters, and I'm the only one who matters in the game. Alright? So he's playing Quake 3 Arena and first-person shooters, and only pure deathmatch. No team deathmatch, no capture the flag maps. Just straight up, can I kill everyone else before they can get to me? And, should be no surprise here, League of Legends, Dota, is what Nick Fury's into. Leading the teams. Doesn't matter why we fight. Begin. Get out there and win. Stop asking so many damn questions. Okay. So now that we have all these guys mapped out, and hopefully you took time and figured out a quadrant, you can see how you map. In fact, here is, when I did this for myself, where I fell in. Okay? I definitely like the impulse play and skilled games, though. I do like to play games I'm good at, but I'm kind of impulsive about it. I don't like grind. I'm not a fan of the grind. I definitely like context and meaning, and I like playing with other people a lot, and I like playing group settings. I don't tend to actually, though, play with other people. I fall in with the lone wolf category. I tend to rather not play the multiplayer on most games, even though I like the team dynamic. And when I do play online, it's only with people I know. Which explains in StarCraft, yes, I love StarCraft, I love building up the massive tech tree and rolling the whole map. That is what I do. So what I can take from this is I can basically make this little glyph here. This is Jason's tool now. And that glyph, if we drop everything else away, represents me. Back to Dan's question, what is it good for? Well, not so much the colored squares that represent me, but the white squares are the ones that are my blind spot. Those are the ones that I don't naturally understand. Those are the players I don't naturally grok. Games that I don't like to play. What can I use this for? Is to fill in those blind spots. I now know what games to play and how to play them to fill in my blind spot. That's important. Player acting, okay? Playing the game as the people who like that game would play it is how you should be playing games. We all know as game designers that we should be playing a lot of games. We should play a lot of games and get exposure to a lot of things. But nobody's ever sat down and said to me, this is how you play a lot of these games to draw from it, okay? I can pick up the mechanics quite quickly, and I can learn from it the design ideas in the game and the mechanics and this twist on that and etc. Fairly simply fast. But why people play JRPGs does not unlock for me when I can list the mechanics. What does unlock for me, however, is if I play JRPGs as the people who love them do. So now that I have this framework, I actually applied it. I've done this. I don't like JRPGs, so I went and I picked up one of the, what I thought to be the worst games. I've been on the podcast, and I'm on record of not liking Final Fantasy, the originals, and definitely not liking Dragon's Quest games. Too much freaking grind, I hate the menu-based combat, etc., etc. nothing in this game that appeals to me. But I sat down and played this game not as Mike. I played this game as the people who play these games would like it. Now, this is a fairly easy one because I know a lot of friends who love this game. So it was easy for me to draw on all the conversations I've had with them as far as what they like about it and how they play these games, and I went into it playing it the way they would. I spent about 20 hours into Final Fantasy because Final Fantasy and it's grindy as fuck. I will say, opening my experience to that, I have an appreciation for JRPGs. I have an understanding of why people like them so much better than I do. And I also kind of developed a fondness for the game in a limited capacity. I didn't tough it out to finish the game, okay? We didn't love it. I've been thinking of picking it up, and I just seem to never bother doing it, okay? But I didn't hate it the entire time. I did, after a while, begin to develop an enjoyment playing the game the way the people loved the game played, and ultimately that's what I'm after. I'm developing an accurate empathy model for the people who play these type of games. I can do this with a whole lot more games and open up to a whole lot new experiences that I can then take back and use in my own game design. And it was great seeing Jason VandenBerghe put all these concepts together for me and put this presentation at sort of the end of this journey that I have now for having a very solid framework for the mechanical design and the emotional design of my game. Now, some bonus credit here is you can take this a step further, and game designers have been taking this a step further, either consciously or subconsciously. This information has been used to move forward not only games, but what a game can be. Into a new category I think is best termed empathy game. Okay? Games that are not about playing a certain genre or the games that you love in your genre, but games themselves that are evoking empathy. Remember, I said in the beginning, as game designers, I want to connect with you. I want to create a shared experience. That's what I'm after. As kind of a core driver. That's what most game designers, I believe, would say their motivation is. You know, creating something, call it a game or call it art, that connects to someone. I think that is a good argument for games are art because artists are wanting to establish a connection, a conversation with someone, to expose a bit of themselves and share it in a very intimate and personal way that they can't do through normal conversation. But you have this category of empathy games, like Journey. In Journey, you play with random strangers on the internet. You're paired up, forcibly, with a random stranger who is anonymous on the internet. This sounds like disaster. This sounds like a game of nothing but griefer. And it is the complete opposite of that. I myself have still not gotten around to sitting down and playing Journey. Of course, I've researched and studied it quite a bit because of its landmark thing. But I think definitely everyone needs to play it from that perspective of how you can design a game so that you actually can develop a connection with a random anonymous gamer on the internet that you never know who they were until the end of the game. Spec Ops: The Line. We have talked about this one on the podcast before. But exploring the concepts of ramifications of war and post-traumatic stress disorder through the framework, through the lens of a first-person shooter, definitely qualifies it for an empathy game. I think this is a game every game designer should play through. Not a long game. And, you know, in terms of a first-person shooter, perhaps not a great game. But what it does on the empathy side, and the narrative, and the track, and the way they weave that into the mechanics of a first-person shooter is amazing. And it is worth playing. And of course, I couldn't complete this set without mentioning The Walking Dead. A game that I cried at the end of. Now, if I told you I watched a movie and I cried at the end of the movie, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a sad movie. Oh, I cried at the beginning of Up. Yeah, freaking beginning of Up is brutal and painful to watch and sad. You say that about a game and people look at you funny, like, what? Why would you cry at a game? But I'm not alone in crying at the end of The Walking Dead, of tearing up a little bit and having a strong connection. And this is what understanding psychology of people and emotional allow us to do in our games. And we're seeing this continue. There's games I don't have on my slide, Papers, Please, and Cart Life, that would well fall into the empathy games category. So you can use this knowledge not only to improve your platformer or your bullet hell shooter, but also to open up new avenues and to redefine what a game even can be. Notice at no point in these slides that I try to define what a game is or isn't, or, does a game have to have conflict, or does a game have to have a win condition in it to be called a game? I didn't, because it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to what makes a good game. It's irrelevant to the enjoyment that somebody will experience playing my game. The definition does not matter. The people who feel they have to have a win condition, the people who test high on the challenge access, I just know what motivates them is not Proteus. That's okay. The guy who made Proteus wasn't going after that argument, wasn't going after that audience. He was making a conscious decision. So, hopefully, when you do this, you make a conscious decision of what kind of game you're going after, the audience you're targeting, because art and games aren't about hitting the spectrum and everyone at once. It's about providing a good experience for the ones who will enjoy it. Okay? It's going to be so watered down if you try to make it be everything to everyone. That's not even something that can be achieved. But what you can do is figure out who you're targeting and the types of gamers and the types of people you want to play that game and dial it in. And that's really what accurate empathy and player acting is about. Now, I said several times in this that these ideas are not my own. Everything in this slide deck is a remix. In the show notes, I have links to everything that was used to comprise these ideas and these slides. They are not my own. This is not my original thought. But these are the things that if you want to read further, I recommend you pick up. A Theory of Fun for Game Design, The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses, Gender-Inclusive Game Design, Expanding the Market. Those three are books. MDA, A Formal Framework Approach to Game Design. This is just a simple 3-page PDF that you could pick up. The 5 Domains of Play is the Jason VandenBerghe talk. Hopefully the ECGC conference will get his keynote online. I believe you can watch this talk on GDC if you have Vault access. You need access to GDC Vault to see his talk. Hopefully at some point the East Coast gamers will put that up online. You can go download all of his slides though, and he did a really good job putting notes in his slides. So if you just want to download his slides and read the notes, you can do that. Lastly, a shout out to Extra Credits for many concepts. Specifically though, Puzzle Games Season 3 Episode 22 goes more into depth of what I did with the Bejeweled thing there. That was actually their numbers and their research on that. So with that, I want to thank you for tuning in and listening to a very different style of podcast. I may do more of these as we go in the future. I may do less of them. I'm committing to nothing at this point. I'm not even committing to being back in a week, but I will be back. If you haven't been on the YouTube channel, drop by, check it out. I've been putting up little short gameplay videos on some indie games that have caught my eye, either by a mechanic or I just wanted to expose them or check them out, be it Fortress 2 or Goddess. I put these up there, and I think Vintage Hero I did recently as well. Just indie games that are catching my eye, what I'm putting up there under Mike's Plays at the moment. And, my schedule is hectic, so I don't know where I'm going next week. I don't know what I'm doing next week. Just trying to get through this year, wrap up the rest of my oral and dental surgery issues. I'll probably come back. I want to do a podcast basically on a roundup of where the big three, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. You know what? The big four. Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and Steam have left the indie developer going into the fall because a lot has happened there while I was away. I'm almost grateful I was away because it seems like every week I would have had to change things, especially for Microsoft, because every week they changed what they were doing. So now that it's kind of all out there and it's kind of stabilized and we're very close to launches, kind of wrap up what's available, what's out there, and also some thoughts on it. So, thank you everyone to tune in, and I will be back doing the podcast at some point in the future.